If you made it through part 1, you already know not every story ends when the lights come on. Tonight we continue 5 more true stories that prove some memories never fade and some warnings never come twice. So sit back, dim the lights, and let's begin. And always remember, stories remind us of the past so we can be ready for the future. And stories may sound the same, but not when I tell them. It was around 9 at night, one of those calm rural evenings when the world feels asleep. My mom and I were watching TV when a soft knock echoed through the house. Late visitors out here were rare, almost unheard of. She opened the door, and there he was, a man in a wet jacket, smiling like a salesman from another decade. He said he was starting a new business and asked if she liked American-made products. He held out a container, a bleach bottle, the kind you'd find under a sink, and said it was a sample cleaner. My mom took it hesitantly. Then he mentioned his partners waiting in the van and turned toward the driveway. That's when she noticed the minivan parked just beyond the porch light's reach. The sliding door was open. Inside sat 5 men, motionless. A cold jolt ran through her. No logos on the van, no company name, just strangers sitting in the dark. She backed up, keeping the door half closed. I was in the hallway, watching, phone in hand, but no signal. She threw the container outside and said, "We're not interested." The man didn't argue, he just stared, long enough for the silence to feel wrong, before slowly walking back toward the van. My mom yelled that she was calling the cops. The man froze mid-step, glanced over his shoulder, then sprinted for the van. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel as it sped down the road. We watched the taillights vanish into the trees. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. When the deputies arrived, they said similar reports had come in from nearby towns, men pretending to sell household products, trying to get invited inside. The container he'd handed her was clean, empty, just bait. We locked every door after that, and for weeks, the sight of any van made my mom flinch. We never saw those men again, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mom hadn't trusted her instincts that night. Not every knock at the door is a neighbor. Some are just looking for a way in.
I've always loved the mountains. Quiet, clean, endless white. Last winter, my friend Q and I decided to go backcountry skiing, which basically means no resorts, no patrols, no boundaries, just snow and silence. It took us 3 hours of driving and another half hour of off-roading before we reached the base of a remote slope. We set up camp under a pale sunset, 2 tents glowing like tiny dots in the wilderness, nothing but forest and wind for miles. The next day, the world looked like a frozen ocean. We climbed for hours, carving paths through untouched snow. Somewhere on the 3rd run, we got separated. Q disappeared down the far side of the hill. I waited at the bottom, calling into the radio, but all I got was static. The sun was already lowering, and the air felt heavier, colder. That's when I saw another skier emerging from the fog, tall, wearing a mask and bright orange backpack. He waved, calling out through the wind. I thought maybe he'd seen Q. He said his name quickly, his voice too calm. Then he asked where our camp was, claiming he and his wife were looking for a safe place to set up. I hesitated, but finally pointed toward the woods. He smiled beneath the mask and said, "Show me." We hiked together through deep snow, the forest closing in around us. The stranger talked casually, too casually. He asked strange questions, how long we'd been there, whether anyone else knew our location. My radio crackled again, faint static mixed with what sounded like Q's voice, panicked, breaking up. I turned to answer, and that's when I noticed the stranger's backpack. It wasn't orange, it was Q's. He turned toward me suddenly, closing the distance fast. I stumbled back, reaching for my pack. The man lunged, grabbing my leg. Pain shot through as something sharp scraped my thigh. I kicked free, pulling out the only thing I could, a flare gun. The second the flare fired, red light exploded through the trees, painting the snow in fire. The stranger staggered back, hands raised, then vanished into the fog. Hours later, a helicopter found me by the flare signal. Q was discovered further down the slope, injured, frostbitten, alive. Whoever that man was, he'd stolen Q's gear and tried to find us. The mountains stayed quiet about the rest. Now, every time I go skiing, I carry more than a first aid kit. I carry the reminder that not everyone you meet in the wilderness is lost. Some are hunting for someone who is.
College towns have their own rhythm. Most nights fade into laughter, distant music, and headlights that come and go. That night I stayed in, studying late, hallway lights humming above the apartment complex. Around 2:30 a.m., I stepped outside to take a break. Cold air, quiet street, cigarette smoke curling up into the yellow glow of a street lamp. Everything felt still until I heard hurried footsteps echoing up the sidewalk. A girl stumbled around the corner, my next-door neighbor. I'd seen her once or twice, but never talked. She looked exhausted, half laughing to herself, digging for her keys. She got inside, door half closed behind her, and then came a knock. It wasn't gentle. 3 sharp hits against the wood. I froze, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Another knock, louder. Through the window, I saw her open the door a few inches. A man stood there, mid-30s maybe. Clean jacket, polite smile. He said something and leaned closer like he knew her. She laughed nervously, trying to end the conversation, but he didn't back away. Their voices drifted down the hallway, awkward, uneven. Then his tone changed, low, insistent. I saw his hand rise slowly and brush a strand of her hair from her face. Every instinct in me said that's wrong. I stood, knocking my book off the step on purpose. The sound cracked through the silence. The man's head turned sharply. He saw me standing in the shadows, just watching. No words, just that stare that lasts too long before he forced a grin and backed away. He left, or so I thought. 10 minutes later, the hallway lights flickered, and I noticed movement outside through the rain-spotted window. He was crouched near her ground-floor window, staring inside. Every muscle in my body went cold. I whispered to 911, giving the address while keeping my eyes on him. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, he looked straight at me. Then he bolted into the dark. vanishing between parked cars. Police arrived within minutes, rain still falling. They checked the building, asked questions, took statements. 3 nights later, an officer called. They'd caught him 2 towns over. He'd been posing as a rideshare driver, following women home after bars closed. That night, he picked the wrong person. Someone who happened to live right next to a light, still on. Now I leave that porch light on every night. Not for me, for whoever walks past and might need someone awake. Sometimes safety isn't about being brave. It's just about being there. Because monsters don't always break in. Sometimes they just knock.
I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and that one time was enough. I was hunting for a cheap ping pong table for my roommate and me. The ads sounded harmless. Used table, good condition, come by tonight. The seller's address was in a quiet neighborhood outside town. So after dinner, I loaded my truck and followed the GPS down a street lined with dark houses and motionless mailboxes. Every porch light was off except one, the last house on the corner. When I parked, the door opened before I even knocked. A man in his 50s stood there, flannel shirt, calm voice, deep smoker's tone. "You here for the table?" he asked. Inside smelt like burnt coffee and dust. He said, "It's down in the basement. Follow me." That should have been the moment I left, but curiosity, or maybe politeness, kept my feet moving down the narrow wooden stairs. The basement was bigger than I expected. Unfinished walls, cement floor, a single bulb swinging slightly. And there it was, the ping pong table, right in the middle. The man clapped his hands once and said, "I'll go find the paddles." His footsteps faded upstairs, then silence. Minutes passed. I checked my phone, no service. I waited longer, tapping the paddle I'd found on the table. That's when the smell hit, metallic, heavy, out of place. I looked around. Every wall was lined with old cabinets and boxes stacked too neatly, labels faded by time. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened a side door that led into a small storage room. A workbench sat against the wall, tools scattered, a drawer half open. Inside were stacks of photographs, all Polaroids, all showing the same room I was standing in, from slightly different angles, and in every picture, a chair sat in the middle of the frame. No people, no explanation, just that chair. Next to the drawer, alphabetized folders marked A through Z. Something in my brain whispered, "Run." But before I could move, I heard the sound of a latch sliding upstairs, the basement door closing. Panic took over. I grabbed a screwdriver from the bench and sprinted to the stairs. The door at the top didn't budge, locked from the other side. I forced the screwdriver into the keyhole, twisting until I heard a faint click. The door swung open with a groan. I didn't look back. I ran out into the night, straight to my truck, and didn't stop until the lights of downtown swallowed me. At the police station, I handed over the photos I'd grabbed. A week later, an officer told me the house belonged to a man under investigation for online trafficking. They'd found more evidence in that basement than they could show me. When I asked why he'd lock me in, the officer just said, "You were never supposed to see what was in those drawers." That was years ago. I don't use Craigslist anymore. Not because I'm afraid of bad deals, but because I met the kind of person who doesn't sell things. He collects them.
When I was 14, babysitting felt like easy money. Board games, cartoons, snacks. One Saturday, I was hired by a family in a quiet neighborhood to watch their 6-year-old son, Cody. His parents were polite but tired. Before leaving, they mentioned something strange. If Cody starts talking to himself, don't worry. He has an imaginary friend named Agnes. I laughed it off. Every kid had one, right? Rain tapped lightly on the windows while I made popcorn and put on an old TV show. Everything was calm for the first hour. Cody sat cross-legged on the carpet with his toys arranged in a perfect circle. He kept looking at the empty space across from him, whispering to it. I asked, "Who are you talking to?" He smiled without looking up. "Agnes." I humored him. Kids do that, but something about the way he paused before answering made the air feel heavier. Then one of the toys on the far side of the room started moving. A little plastic car, its crank turning by itself. Later, while washing dishes, I heard him talking again, this time from the hallway. But there was another voice, faint, distant, replying in a tone I couldn't understand. I walked to the doorway and asked who he was speaking to. He looked up confused and said, "She's asking if she can come upstairs." Before I could answer, a door at the end of the hallway creaked open. Slow, steady, as if pushed by invisible hands. Cody suddenly ran toward the stairs, shouting, "Agnes, wait!" I grabbed him before he could climb. The house went silent, except for the rain. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps from the ceiling above us, like someone walking upstairs. I froze. There was supposed to be nobody home. Cody whispered, "She's mad now." Trying to stay calm, I told Cody to wait by the couch and took a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Every step upstairs groaned under my weight. The parents' bedroom door was cracked open, curtains swaying, even though the windows were shut. The air was cold enough to see my breath. I called out, "Agnes?" half joking, half terrified. The curtains stopped moving, and for a split second, I swore I saw the outline of a small figure standing behind them. Moments later, headlights swept across the windows. His parents were home. Everything snapped back to normal. Cody was asleep on the couch, toys neatly put away. When they asked how the night went, I just said, "Quiet." But as I walked out into the rain, I glanced back through the window and saw one of Cody's toy cars rolling slowly across the table, stopping at the edge, as if someone had pushed it.
And that was the final story for tonight. 10 true tales, each one a quiet reminder that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just whispers. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying until the end. There are still more stories waiting in the dark, and soon I'll tell them too. So make sure you're subscribed and keep your lights low. Because stories remind us of the past, so we can be ready for the future. And always remember, stories may sound the same, but not when I tell them.